Hey everyone, welcome back to the 10th episode of the Neutrally Biased podcast. And today we are going to talk about something which you may call philosophical or existential, and that is, I guess you read the title, Ordinary People Are Evil? Question mark. Now, if you have listened to many of our previous podcasts, you would know that I always start with a story, and this is no exception. So, let us dive into an experiment that was conducted in the bright summer of 1967 in Palo Alto, California, by Ron Jones, who was a professor in Caberly High School. And he wanted his children, his students, his high school graders, to learn why Nazis did what they did. And so instead of grinding through the same old textbooks, through the same old history chapter, he did something interesting. He started an experiment with his own students, which he would then need to shut down within 5 days. So, on the first day of the experiment, he played Wagnerian music as his students entered one by one. And Wagnerian music, for a reference, is this. Yes, that's how it sounds like. It makes everything feel grandiose. And after they have all assembled, he writes on the blackboard the key to success and power. What he says: strength through discipline. And then he introduces the experiment as the third wave experiment. He highlights that it would be a non-threatening experiment and establishes the aim of the experiment as the abolishment of the democracy as whole. He convinced the students that how he believed democracy focused too much on the individual and limited community strength. And so he laid out some rules for them to follow the strength through discipline motto. So the first rule that they had to follow was they had to sit straight with their backs upright and with their feet flat on the ground. As well as they need to greet him in unison every time he comes to the classroom. And secondly, all the successful participants would get an A, and if there is any attempt of a revolution, that would get them an F. But if there is a successful revolution, that would get them an A. Now, Ron just expected that everything would waver off after the first day itself. But even on the second day, the students followed these rules and Ron was impressed. And so, Ron wrote another rule: strength through community. And he created another bizarre rule which would change the course of this experiment. He commanded each and every third wave member to give a Nazi salute to another fellow third wave member whenever they see them. And this started to make things a little bit of rewind of the past. Because not only had they had to follow these rules in their own classrooms and school, they also had to follow these rules in their own homes. And so Ron made an intelligent choice of making students liable for each other, to check whether the other person, the other fellow third wave member, is giving you a Nazi salute or not. And people did start to notice all the Nazi saluting all over the school. So by the end of the second day, over 60 people joined the third wave movement. Now on the third day, Ron introduced what he called strength through action to the board. And he gave several tasks to his students to do throughout the day. May it be revising the addresses of the fellow students as well as their names, or making banners, posters and pamphlets and hanging them throughout the entire school, which was reminiscent of a Nazi auditorium. And at the end of the third day, the third wave movement was 200 strong. It was just growing day by day, day by day. And on the fourth day, things started to get a bit more realistically ridiculous. Now, because on the fourth day, he distributed membership cards to each of the students, and out of all the membership cards, there were 3 cards with X marked on them. And whoever had this X card had to write the names of other people who did not follow the rules and the laws of the third wave movement. Not only that, half of his class reported misdeeds about each other, from imperfect salutes to a conspiracy to overthrow Ron. Ron said this was phenomenal. It was just like an underground activity. He saw close friends betraying each other. He heard that there were a group of students smoking in the bathroom and discussing how they could overthrow Ron. And then he was warned that there is some rowdy boy who wanted to overthrow him by bringing a cap pistol and forcibly assassinating him, thus scoring an A. Then on the fifth day, a rumor got spread among the entire class that they are going to beat up the 3 of the most skeptical members of the third wave movement. And when Jones got to know of it, he decided to put a halt to the experiment. So what he did, he commanded the 3 of the most skeptical members to go to the library for their own safety. And on the other hand, he invited all the other students to the hall for some session which was looking more of a rally for them. And there he had a television on the stage running with a static background. Time passed by and students got bored, and some were even thinking that this is a trap. But then immediately, the spotlight shifted to Jones, with a World War II montage playing behind him. And he broke the silence by saying, "Listen closely. I have something important to tell you. Sit down. There is no leader. There is no such thing as a national youth movement called the Third Wave. You have been used, manipulated, shoved by your own desires into the place you now find yourself. You're no better or worse than the German Nazis we have been studying. You thought that you were the elect, and you were better than those outside this room. You bargained your freedom for the comfort of discipline and superiority. You chose to accept that group's will and the big lie over your conviction. Oh, you think to yourself that you were just going along for the fun, that you would extricate yourself at any moment. But where were you really heading? How far would you have gone?" Students were immediately horrified after they heard Ron speaking these words to them. They got horrified knowing that how the experiment turned out to be a success because of their own failure to testify the roots that were shoved into their own intellect. Within these 5 days, the entire school became a replica of the Nazi regime, with Jones being the Hitler, of course, the members of the third wave movement being like the members of the Nazi party, and the secret police force formed by Jones that protected him with armbands throughout the whole school, like the SS troop contingent in the Nazi Germany, which reported everything to Hitler and banished any traitor if found. And what is even more interesting than that is the fact nobody actually cared. Just like the onlookers in Nazi Germany who did not give a shit about what was happening to the Jews, teachers were not bothered about the disruption in routine. Parents were not at all concerned about what their children are doing with the Nazi salute in their schools. And parents who were concerned just fuel the desire of their children to just go ahead and participate more in the movement. In fact, the only thing that got close to a confrontation with Ron was when a family rabbi called him to just question him about what was actually going on in the experiment. And he too got satisfied after listening to his vague answers. So the third wave experiment makes us question, are we all born evil? Is being discriminatory inherent to our nature? Or are we, the ordinary people, manipulated into carrying out monstrosities like the Holocaust or the Nanking massacre? Well, the answer is much more complicated than you think. Equality has been the most unobvious answer to all human social problems. Our past is a proof of the statement, our present is an exception to it. Now, let alone humans, in fact, all the species, all the mammals in the entire planet are discriminatory in nature. In fact, the process of evolution itself is discriminatory. Offsprings with better variations survive, thrive, and reproduce, whereas offsprings with worse variations just cease out of existence. But compared to our fellow mammalian species on the planet, humans are far more cooperative and far more flexible than them. Let's take the example of lions. And lions have a patriarchal structure where the alpha male discriminates among their own group, whereas humans moreover discriminate those outside of their own groups, or the outgroups, as one could say. This is known as in group favoritism, and it has existed ever since we were just a bunch of hunter gatherers. Because in the Stone Age, when the fight was to survive, the rule was, if you can hunt a mice, we will be nice. At that time, your ability was linked to your worth. And that's how humans discriminated when they were just a bunch of hunter gatherers. But as we developed, as we shifted to agrarian economies, into doing agriculture and expanding more than ever, reproducing more than ever, and living above our survival needs, we also started forming social structures such as religion, caste, creeds, communities, traditions, cultures, etc. And our way of life changed drastically. And that should mean a drastic change in our way of discrimination as well. Except it isn't. Because even though our environment had changed, but our psychological mind remained the same as a primordial hunter ancestors. So we went on defining the basis of discrimination by linking ability to cultural differences, as well as compatibility to cultural differences, even if they were really, really trivial. And that's how racism, communalism, sexism, and all sorts of differentiating isms were born, which led to horrific things throughout history, like the Holocaust, apartheid, slave trade, and even crusades. However, to really verify that discrimination or being prone to discrimination is an inherent part of the human nature, we need to make ourselves known to the blue eyes, brown eyes experiment. So, in 1968, Jane Elliott, who was a school teacher, wanted her third graders to feel how discrimination really is. So she went on asking to her students, you think how you would feel to be judged by the color of your own skin? As students wondered over the question, she followed up by saying it might be interesting to judge people today by the color of their eyes. And so, for that day, she labeled blue eyes better than brown eyes. When she was met with resistance from the brown-eyed people, or the brown-eyed students, I should say, she wrote melanin on the blackboard. And then she said, blue-eyed children have more melanin than brown-eyed children, and hence they are more intelligent, more smarter. In other words, she used facts to create pseudoscience. And then she started to set up some rules. The first rule was that the brown-eyed people do not get to drink from the drinking fountain. Rather, they will reuse their paper cups. They will have less playtime, and they do not get to play with the blue-eyed children. In fact, identification marks were given in the form of collars to the brown-eyed children so that they could wear them and people would know which one is blue-eyed and which one is brown-eyed. As these collars were being distributed to the brown-eyed children, one of the blue-eyed children said, "Miss Elliot, you better keep your yardstick on your desk in case the brown-eyed people got out of hand." In fact, many of the blue-eyed children started to get bossy around the brown-eyed ones once the collar had been distributed, feeling superior to them. And they were also quick to identify many of their other privileges, such as early recess time and 10 minutes more playtime. And after the experiment, when one of the brown-eyed kids was interviewed, he said, "When we were down at the bottom, everything bad was happening to us." Another one said, "The way they treated you, you felt like you didn't even want to try to do something." That day saw friends getting separated, and those who tried to dominate the brown-eyed people got into fights. But on the second day, Jane switched the rules. Now the brown-eyed ones were labeled as better than the blue-eyed ones. And it was the blue-eyed ones who were now wearing the identification marks with all the rules biased towards the brown-eyed ones. And this sort of discrimination had a really, really vivid impact on the performance of the students, because either of these groups either accelerated or got hindered in their performance of studies or in their rate of memorization and learning. Because the brown-eyed children were way faster in solving their puzzles than the first day, and the blue-eyed ones got a lot slower. In hindsight, Jane Elliott said, "I watched what had been marvelous, cooperative, wonderful, thoughtful children turn into nasty, vicious, discriminating little third graders in just 15 minutes. So the blue eyes, brown eyes experiment not only fulfilled its motive of making us feel the impacts of discrimination, but it also confirmed the fact that inherently we all are discriminatory. However, inclination to discrimination or being prone to discrimination does not also mean that it gets reflected in our conduct as well. And even though there are numerous instances of intolerance, of bigotry, of unacceptance throughout history of the entire world, there are also few instances of inclusivity and diversity where people have accepted others despite of cultural differences. Such as when the king of Gujarat, Raja Jadev Rana, gave shelter to Zoroastrians when they were being persecuted during the Islamic invasions of the 8th century, or Alexander the Great included homosexual men, which was known as the sacred tribe of thieves, in his conquest. In fact, today, inclusivity is the norm. Most of the democracies in the world today provide equality and freedom to their own citizens. But there's one more way ordinary people are evil. During the 1960s, Stanley Milgram conducted an experiment that would unveil the darkest sides of human nature. What he did was he recruited 40 men through newspaper ads for a psychological experiment, and he assigned them a role of a teacher. And what they had to do was that to ask questions to a learner that was sitting in the other room. And along with that, they had a switchboard in front of them ranging from 15 volts to 450 volts. Whenever the learner gave the wrong answer or did not reply at all, they were required to give them a shock. And shockingly, most of the participants did deliver these shocks to the learner whenever they gave a wrong answer. In fact, 65% of the total participants delivered the shock to the maximum level, whereas only 12 participants stopped before reaching the maximum level. And all of them shocked the learner despite hearing his screams, his shouting, even him telling them that they have a heart condition. But only that I did not know was that learner was not actually being shocked. They even, some of them even asked Stanley if they could continue with the experiment or if they should continue shocking the learner. And Stanley said, please continue. And they agreed. They did continue. So this was the Milgram experiment of the 1960s. And it showed that there is another evil in us, the ordinary people. One that is even bigger and nastier than discrimination itself. That is obedience to authority. Obedience to authority is something we cannot deny falling into. From the rules of our schools, to the instructions of our bosses who follow the instruction of their bosses, and so on and so forth. And the laws imposed by the governments on us. And I'm not saying that there is something wrong in following these rules or this discipline that the society imposes on us. They're absolutely necessary for maintaining order and discipline and preventing the society from sliding into chaos. But what is wrong though is the obedience of the ordinary people, the non-questioning manner, or I was just following orders attitude. Because if we flip through the pages of history, we do not see peasants, ordinary people like peasants, being reflected or being written in history, their stories being written. We see rebels, we see revolutionaries, we see outliers, we see people who refuse to follow, we see people who did not accept ideologies, we see people who became extraordinary. And it is behind these extraordinary people that there are herds of ordinary people following them. Hitler did it, Osama bin Laden did it, Stalin did it, and people followed them. In fact, the accounts of the SS contingent in the Nazi Germany shows that they were highly normal people. In fact, the SS troops that protected Hitler, that bodyguarded Hitler, actually came from ordinary backgrounds, such as that of butcherer or a slave or a laborer or a watchmaker. These were people who were frustrated, maladjusted, and disappointed in themselves, just like any other ordinary person. And at last, these were the very same people who became responsible for the killings of 6 million Jews, Poles, and the disabled. And other less polarized people in the Nazi Germany just became onlookers minding their own business. Now, what is even more interesting is that obedience can also lead to savagery and discrimination. During the invasion of China by the Japanese in World War II, they plundered the city of Nanking. And what they did after it was even more horrifying. They turned the once prosperous city of Nanking into a graveyard as they killed people and raped women. Between 20,000 to 80,000 women, from girls to the elderly, were raped during the Nanking massacre. Pregnant women were stabbed with bayonets. There were killing contests between soldiers that littered the streets of Nanking with bodies. It is estimated 200,000 to 300,000 people were killed during the Nanking massacre, carried out by normal, ordinary people who were just like the civilians they killed. before they turn into soldiers. Even today, in a world as distracted as it is, there is still a potential Nazi in us. If a situation such as the Third Reich is born, we wouldn't be the ones saving Jews from the Holocaust. We wouldn't be the ones like the brave men during those times who did these heroic actions. Instead, we would be the ones committing these crimes. Most of us would be, and some of us even may enjoy doing it. And same goes for becoming a terrorist or a jihadi. In fact, even today, we blindly follow political ideologies, politicians, priests, so-called gurus, stereotypes, advertisements, without any skepticism. And when met with the consequences of our very own actions, we question why. In the end, ordinary people can be manhandled into submission of their own will with some conviction and emotion. There is only a difference of one Nazi, one jihadi, one tyrant to turn the world upside down.